say, oh, so-and-so needs no introduction, but frankly, it's quite rude if we don't introduce them. So I'm going to introduce her anyway, in case you fail in a quiz test as to how many England caps she won. 71, but those who were watching your career at the time think it should have been a lot more. Do you agree?
Absolutely.
Oh, she does. Good. That's a good start, because it means she's honest, and we want a bit of honesty up here, don't we? Should have been a lot more, but anyway. Played in 2 World Cups, 3 European Championships, the 2012 Olympic Games here in front of 70,000 people, Team GB beating Brazil. We won't talk about the quarterfinals, will we, Neats? No, in Coventry. European champion with Arsenal in 2007 when they won every league game that season, by the way, winning the quadruple. And she started both legs of the final. And trophies everywhere. Played league football in Sweden, in the United States, WSL football again with Chelsea and Aston Villa. And now coaching as first team coach with Bristol City, who happen to be top of the table in the Championship. So she's not even doing a bad job there either. It's all going rather well. And she's with us today, also a pundit and equality campaigner. There will be time for questions, by the way. We are going to finish this session. I'm under strict instructions, 11 o'clock it has to finish, so there will be time for questions. But just first of all, if you can just tell us, going way back into the days of black and white, Neats, when you started playing football, what was the landscape like then? I mean, you had a brother, didn't you? But I think you had to drag him out to play rather than the other way around. What was it like?
Yeah, I think I used to, take my brother out in my local estate and stick him in goal, which he wasn't too thrilled about. But it was kind of the landscape was that you feel like you're the only girl, playing in your area. Like women's football didn't really exist because it wasn't visible, it wasn't on TV, wasn't happening in primary school. I was the only girl playing in my primary school at playtimes. And then I got to secondary school and, because I'd been playing all the time in primary school in my local estate, I thought it was normal, which of course it is. And I would just play. And, eventually I had an amazing head of PE who was just like, we have to put a girls' team on to support you, but also to encourage other girls. So she was ringing up lots of schools, and eventually I was able to, play some other schools. But by the time I got to Arsenal, I was 13, joined Arsenal, and you trained in the evenings, 8 o'clock at night, you traveled all over the country, Hackney and different tournaments. So it really took a lot of commitment, I think, from my parents to support me in that as well. And it was the days of, you got one kit the whole season and you just had to deal with that, and you had to do your own washing, and you didn't really have that kind of wider support in terms of nutrition and all of those things. And that really was sort of the landscape of the game. Everybody was doing that across the teams, juggling motherhood, work. I was a student as well, and I had teammates who were working full-time jobs and trying to play and compete domestically, but also in Europe. So, that really was where the game was at the time.
Yeah, but your dad was a massive Arsenal fan, so he didn't mind taking you everywhere. And he probably even washed the kit for you, that one kit, just to make sure you stayed at Arsenal.
It definitely helped that my dad was an avid Arsenal supporter. So, yeah, he was really proud and he wanted to support me in that journey. But it was difficult, of course. You're trying to manage school and you're getting your homework done and get to training. But we all just loved it so much. And I felt like finally I found a community of girls who were just like me, and I was no longer on this island on my own. So yeah, it was good.
And you talk about Arsenal and how difficult it was. You only be training twice a week and you're not professional, what have you. And yet you were head and shoulders above other clubs. You were leading the way, weren't you? Because some of your teammates had jobs, whether they were washing the men's kit, as we've heard previously explained here, but they were actually pioneers, weren't they?
Oh, absolutely. I owe so much to them in terms of their knowledge, their leadership, the way they brought me in as a youngster. I grew around those women, because that's what they were. I was a teenager coming into this environment with women who had a whole sort of life experience. They were working, they were raising children, and I felt like I could always count on them. I could always ask them questions that I couldn't necessarily ask teachers at school or my parents and that kind of thing. And to have leaders in the room like Faye White, Rachel Yankee, Kelly Smith, they became, they were my role models as well. And it was just an honor sort of to be able to share the training pitch with them week in, week out.
Yeah, Jane Ludlow wasn't backwards in coming forwards either, was she?
No, exactly. You always had to have, a fierce leader with lots of energy, and Jane Ludlow was definitely that. And I think she was probably the one that allowed me to sort of get a bit thicker skin as well. And I think
In what way?
Well, she had her moments where, maybe we wasn't playing as well, or we weren't, she knew that she could get more out of us, so she wouldn't hold back, shall we say. But
yeah, we get the picture.
Yeah, but you need that sometimes. You need someone to just, give you that sort of injection of energy and boost your confidence. And we definitely had characters like that in the team.
Just slightly going off piste, I happen to think that Jane Ludlow would make a brilliant WSL manager. I know she's managed Reading and Wales, and she's academy manager at Man City. And I'm not her agent or anything, but would you agree that she'd be a really good WSL? No, genuinely, I'm fascinated having worked with her, because she seems to have all the personal qualities as well as the coaching background. And obviously, we only have 3 WSL managers permanently at the moment out of 12 who are female.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, not just because she was my former teammate, it's not a plug, but she, I think she's passionate, she's driven, she's played the game at a time where we didn't have the kind of support. She understands where it needs to get, kind of understands what resources need to be delivered to support the talent of today. And you need people that are sort of committed. She's always been committed and a big supporter and advocate and ambassador of the game. And the more leaders like that we can get in the women's game, who young girls and can look up to and relate to, is really important.
Really sorry to Manchester City, by the way. I'm just trying to plug somebody out of your club. But just going back to winning the UEFA Cup, as it was called then, it was over 2 legs against the Swedish side, Umeå. When you played over there in the first leg and won in stoppage time, it was 6,000 fans that were there. The second leg at Boreham Wood, there were just under 3,500. Now, in the next couple of weeks, Arsenal are going to be playing at the Allianz Arena against Bayern Munich in the quarterfinals of the Champions League, as it's called now. And then they're going to be playing at the Emirates, and all the big games now are at the Emirates. What was it like then? Did you just think, oh, it's great, we've got 3,500 fans at Boreham Wood, or was there slight frustration? We've won every league game this season, we've won every domestic trophy, we've won I think it was 7 trophies you won if you include the smaller ones as well, and we've won the European trophy as well. What was your thinking at that time?
I think at the time we felt like Meadow Park was our fortress. Actually, so we had that sort of mentality, like, you're coming to our house, so but to be honest, I think we always had that kind of mentality where we were just grateful. We were grateful that people showed up and they'd come and watch, and that we could get 3,000 there and create that atmosphere. We didn't really think about, I guess, the bigger stadiums, because probably we didn't think at the time that we could fill them, or that we'd get the kind of attention or support or the investment resource to make that happen. So, yeah, I guess, we thought it was an amazing thing that we could get 3,000 to Meadow Park and create the kind of atmosphere you need for major championships sometimes in a tough game, of which it was, and we needed the extra support. But it's great to see just how far the game has come, and that we're able to, get sold out showcase games and events today.
And you did it without Kelly Smith, who was suspended for both final legs, wasn't she? But that was an incredible achievement. But you talked there about gratitude, and I'm fascinated by that, because there does seem to be a theme in women's football over the years that we've always been grateful. We're grateful for a big crowd. We're grateful, Kelly's nodding away, we're grateful for anything that we can get, because really this game's been owned by men. If we're just being honest, and we have to be honest here, it's been run by men, it's kind of been owned by men. Men have made decisions. Yes, that's changing now, and it's wonderful to see so many male allies in the room as well. Where do you think we are with gratitude, and do we need to stop being grateful and start changing our mindset a little bit, and how do we do that?
Yeah, I think probably my generation, the generation before, was always, having that mentality that we were grateful. Got the extra pair of socks, so I was like buzzing, need that. that type of attitude. But I think we have surpassed it now. And we've got, young women obviously represented across the league, and obviously within the Lionesses, that are showing that you can, that they deserve the right to have the opportunity. They have the right to play. They deserve to, be recognized for what they do, the commitment they have in terms of the training, the dedication, the level of competition. And we're getting to a point where we're empowering young women to finally go, yes, I'm here, I belong here, I deserve to play, and you should recognize the value that I contribute, not only within the game, but generally society. Because it's important for young girls to be out there going, wow, that's incredible. I want to be that person, whether it's in sport or in another field. That's what we should be doing, boosting all women and all girls.
It's hard not to be grateful in a way, isn't it, when games didn't used to be on TV. And I see on Twitter now some of the younger journalists perhaps being critical that, these games are only on the FA Player. And I want to scream, you can watch every game live. Oh my God, we couldn't used to watch FA Cup semi-finals. So again, you try and stop yourself being grateful. 2 games a weekend on Sky Sports, that's wonderful. And what the BBC are doing as well. It's all wonderful. But then I was talking to somebody senior in the men's game at the London Football Awards the other night and talking about this and saying, but we should have more for women's football. We should have more. And he said, who's going to pay for it? And I said, men have always had ownership of the game, so perhaps, yes, we should have money for the men's game. And I don't have the answers, and we can talk about this throughout the day and put your hand up in a moment if you'd like to. But what are your thoughts on that, how we do equalise equality in the playing field in terms of who funds it?
Well, I think, whether you're in broadcasting or in any kind of business, if you feel there is equal value in what women contribute, in terms of work, in terms of, the game of football, then you should just invest and redirect some of your resources and in your economic capacity to lift up the quality of that so that it is on par with what you're delivering for the men's game. That's my personal view. I don't think the men's game has always been this polished thing that we have today where we watch the Premier League and it's, all glossy and everything's great. It's had a process to get to the point where now you have subscription channels and, pay-to-view Champions League games. Well, we can do the same for the women, and we have to create the pathway or the process to get there and understand how do we do that. Well, siphon the money in a different direction to try and get some equity where women have never had it.
And sponsorship is obviously a big thing. I mean, we've seen what can happen when investment has been made into women in goalkeeper coaching, into facilities, into ice bars, into everything, allowing women to be the best they can be. And then are you seeing that pathway now towards, we saw what happened here with the Lionesses, and that made a huge step. But do you think it's evident for sponsors now to see what the benefits are, especially with TV coverage and media coverage, etc.?
Yeah, I think the quality of the game speaks for itself. I think the audience and the attendance figures, the social media engagement has massively grown. But ultimately, why do women always have to be held to a higher standard? Why do we have to have success first before we get the kind of support or the investment or the, belief that we can achieve something? I think naturally you invest in somebody and you empower them to believe that they can get there with the right support, then you'll get the quality and you'll get the outcomes out of it. So now it's almost, talking to sponsors, talking to stakeholders within the game and going, women have equal value just like anyone else in the workforce. If you invest in them and you give them the time and you give them the support, they 9 times out of 10 will deliver. At least that's my experience working within football teams.
And the fact that you were at Arsenal, where you had David Dein, who was on the board, who was incredibly supportive and really a pioneer in that regard, and Arsene Wenger, who was the manager and incredibly supportive. And over the years, it does seem to have been male allies on the men's club boards who've loosened the purse strings and invested, but now we've seen what's happened as a result of that. But I just want to ask you, before we open it up to the floor, about the challenges, and again, we need to be honest here and realistic about what's going on in the game, and sort of hearing anecdotally about players now demanding more for themselves because they're seeing what certain other players are getting, and of course the Lionesses are in a different bracket commercially perhaps to other players. But what are your thoughts on players who are demanding, say, £100,000 a year when there's not necessarily the money there, the sponsorship there yet? Should those players be demanding more and more? Or do you think they need to have a little think about where the game is at the moment and realise it's not perhaps where they'd like it to be financially?
Yeah, I think it's a wider education piece for players in terms of, individual clubs are in a different place economically within the game and what they're trying to achieve. There's different ways to promote support and development for players, and that might not necessarily be financially directly in their pocket, but in terms of the resources, in terms of the staff that we bring in, sports science is huge, nutrition, psychological support, when they get to recognize the benefits of that in terms of how it will develop them personally in their football journey, I think, they'll understand that one day, you get to be in the position of some of the lionesses, the rest will follow in terms of sponsorship, marketing, and commercial success. So it is a challenge, because what young players probably see as well with social media is the success story and the sort of the elite level of the game and what those players are able to acquire. But we also have to question, the people who are supporting them, the agents, and that they're giving them the right information and the right support and tools to recognize that, this isn't something you get immediately. It happens with time, it happens with hard work. And it's what's the most important thing? The most important thing is that you can be the best athlete, footballer, person you possibly can be, ultimately first.
We had that similar sort of conversation with Hedvig Lindahl, legendary Sweden goalkeeper who's played in many finals and World Cups, etc. And it was in front of a room full of mostly male executives of male clubs in the Champions League. And she said to them that it's not always, as you said, it's not always about actual financial handouts and pay, etc. It's about how you make the female players feel. It's about the respect levels you have towards them. It's about a chief executive or a board member coming along to the women's training ground and talking to them and asking them, what can we do for you? What are we doing well? What could we be doing better? And she said that was a huge part of clubs that she'd been at where it hadn't gone so well and clubs where it had gone so well. It's not necessarily the clubs you'd expect it to be where things have gone well. Would you go along with that?
Yeah, well, I know Hedvig very well, and I think, she's one of the major advocates for equality in the game, and I'd have to agree with her wholeheartedly. But until you get people in the room in terms of the decision-making platforms, whether that's in your clubs or governing bodies, you won't see those changes happen, because it's ultimately getting those conversations on the table in the first place. We played at a generation where women's football wasn't even on the agenda. It was just a side thing that was happening at clubs with volunteers and people who were just dedicated to committing time. And now you've got commitments from clubs, hopefully, and people within leadership positions to go, the first thing on the agenda is women's football. How do we support it from the pyramid, grassroots all the way to the top? And how can we keep moving it forward? But until you get those variations or diversity of thoughts and individuals from different backgrounds who can connect and understand the challenges for people out there, then you can't make the difference that we hope to see.
Yeah, so we will absolutely talk about that in a moment. Just in terms of on that point, would you recommend, because there are lots of people here from clubs in the room, would you recommend that that's perhaps a takeaway from here, that when they go back to their clubs, they could talk to the people on their board and say, come down to the training ground and just have a conversation and talk to your players and ask how things are going and what more they can do? Because, again, it's not always about the finances, is it?
No, of course not. I think it goes down as simple as things as kit. If a club discusses, we've had the white short debate, haven't we, about women in shorts and understanding the needs of women and how they feel when they wear the kit. When they have those conversations with the players and get to understand their needs, that goes much further in terms of the impact for those players from a young age through to senior level than giving them more money per se, because they'll feel more comfortable to perform at their best. They feel that they're being heard. They can voice their opinions and their issues. So I do think it's important that senior figures within clubs make it a point to understand and meet their workforce, because essentially that's what it is. They're players that are representing the club. So you have to know what's going on the ground. What do they need? And it's basic things like the changing facilities. There might not be enough toilets and things that you sometimes take for granted. You can go a long way. So I do think it's really important that happens more often.
Communication and listening. Now, diversity is a huge issue that you are very, very passionate about. You've been very outspoken about for quite some time, but now you have a lot more airtime, don't you, now that you've retired, to be able to talk about this. And where do you think we are? Because we know about the announcement of the emerging talent centres and how they're changing things there to try and ensure that many more players from different backgrounds are able to get to training grounds. But where do you assess where we are now and where we're heading in terms of that diversity?
Yeah, I think, we know that the game isn't as diverse as we want it to be. I think that the FA, got to give credit to them for launching the Emerging Talent Centre scheme initiative to try and encourage clubs to go out there and actually proactively seek talent within areas across the country. It's something that has to happen because we have to understand the challenges for different girls. Like I've said, when I was younger, it was much easier for me to go into the city where, I had train transportation or buses that could get me there 8 p.m. Most girls can't travel alone for a number of reasons, as we all know, but it's more difficult in terms of access. And so we have to improve the access for girls from all backgrounds across the country. I think it's going to take time. Obviously, it's not reflected in our elite levels of the game at the moment. We know that, but we have to give it the time as well. And hopefully with the amazing legacy piece the Lionesses have done with, lobbying the government as well, will encourage that kind of two-pronged approach with schools to encourage more, activity for girls from all sorts of backgrounds within schools.
Yeah, to clarify for anyone who's not wholly aware, the FA's new look, Women and Girls Player Pathway, wants to make it more diverse, accessible and inclusive. So 95% of players accessing an emerging talent centre will be able to do so within 1 hour of where they live by 2024. That's on the playing side, apart from simply being able to access training centres, because we know traditionally some of them have been in leafy Hertfordshire and leafy, sorry, where I live. There we go, just down the road from my house. What else do you think can be done in terms of ensuring that in, 5-10 years' time or so, we're not looking at potentially an all-white England squad because players have been able to come through? What else needs to happen?
Well, I think like any business, you have to be reflective and internally look at your organisation and go, well, actually, how diverse are we? What are we doing internally from all levels? From not just the playing perspective, the wider team around the players, from physios to doctors to sports science to nutritionists. Are we giving as many people the opportunity to access and come into the game and feel that this is a space that they are welcome in and that they can thrive in, and it's not just a kind of, who kind of environment where people, because they've known them for a long time, are working in those roles and that type of thing. Because there's lots of people, language is important. Some people don't apply for jobs based off the language that's put on paper. That, whether you're in engineering or something like that, if you feel that it automatically excludes you, then you probably won't apply. You probably won't go for the interview. So I think ensuring that the culture around the wider game is as inclusive as possible will definitely allow more people to come through the door. But we have to be proactive and understand the cultures of all sorts of people that we're trying to encourage to get involved in the game.
And we see brilliant people here from Brentford. I always hold up as an example of their phenomenal diversity, and so genuinely happy to see that you're getting the rewards on the pitch for all the wonderful work you do off it. And thank you for your win last night as a Wolverhampton Wanderers supporter. I'm extremely grateful to you and Brighton. I love Brentford and Brighton anyway, but they're just top of the tree last night. But who else do you look at and think, because it's easy to go, well, you're not doing this and people aren't doing that and they're not doing that. Who do you look at and think, they're doing that really well? I went to this event, or I went to this club, or I went to this place, and they did that really well, and look at the rewards. Who would you hold up?
Well, you just said Brentford, but I think Crystal Palace is another example of a club doing great work. QPR as well. I think, actively, proactively seeking to get people, not just from the professional level of the game, grassroots, entry level, to just experience coaching and education and learning and all of those things. I think, off the top of my head, there's a number of clubs out there that are proactively trying, but it could be better across the wider game. Les Ferdinand's talked a lot about this as well, in terms of going directly into the community, meeting the people that are connected to the club, because football clubs are beacons of the society that they operate within, and they do a lot more than just football. Sometimes it's the added support, it's the education piece, it's, volunteering. When there's a crisis, delivering food. There's so many ways you can engage with communities and just get them that connection to a club. So, I think those are the clubs that stand out in my head at the moment. But that would be my advice to any club that wants to get involved with their local communities.
And just finally, before we open up to the floor, because I'll be in such trouble if I'm running late, just finally, in terms of diversity, we talk about having more diverse people in clubs and what have you. Is it up to diverse people as well, maybe players on the men's side while they're playing, maybe to use the extra hours in their day after training, to maybe go into the marketing department or the ticketing department or elsewhere, to go, okay, well, I'd love to carry on working here after I retire. I'd love. What do you do? What do you do, Cliff? You know, what does the director of football actually do? Could they themselves be going, okay, I'd like to do more courses? The club would probably sponsor them, I would imagine, to take ownership of that and to upskill themselves to make sure that when they do retire, which might be sooner than they'd hoped, that they could perhaps hit the ground running, get into those positions, then be into more of a position to appoint non-white managers, etc.
I think, of course, we all can take ownership of anything in life, but I do think in the men's game, the culture has been different for such a long time historically, because the professional game has been the pinnacle, so all the priority has been focused on playing and not necessarily the transition piece. I think we're doing a much better job of that in the women's game, to encourage young players to think about their long-term career paths beyond playing. So we're giving them access and opportunities to discover those things now. That's definitely something that the men's game can improve on. But I think, you know, ultimately, it's a difficult one because it's not reflected in the men's game either. You know, they're also working within a system where they don't see those positions reflected in themselves. And they all come from various backgrounds as well, where they maybe don't have the kind of support initially to believe that they could be in positions of leadership or in management and those types of things. So it's also encouraging them by supporting them and mentoring them and actually grabbing their hand and going, you know what, come and sit in a meeting with me and listen to the day's events. We're talking to sponsors. Because actually a lot of them have a lot to say. You know, I've spoken to a lot of former players like Troy Deeney, and you know, they got masses to say. They just never have the opportunity themselves. Because I think the game, in a way, tries to separate players from the top table, because I'm sure if they heard what some players had to say, they would be a bit, you know, standoffish. They'd be like, we don't really want to deal with this. We just want you to go and play.
Okay. Any questions? Preferably quick fire if we can. Yes?
About your time at Bristol City and any of the... of course. Just to hear more about your time at Bristol City and any barriers that you feel that you've faced there, and what successes that you're having as well.
Yeah, thank you. To be honest, I've had the best time so far at Bristol City. I didn't know that I would go into coaching initially, and I got encouragement from Lauren Smith, the head coach, and the wider staff. And honestly, when I walked in there, I just felt like immediately supported by everybody, and that I had the time to breathe and figure out who I am as a coach as well. And I actually said to the staff, you know, that I'd actually never been in a club environment where we were all in one building. For example, at Bristol, we're all in one building, it's open plan. I can engage with all the staff across the game in terms of the boys and the girls departments. You know, we have many interactions with Nigel Pearson. Our GM's in here at the minute, but yeah, you know, and that's what you need. You need those kind of organic moments to just bump into people and ask them about their day and ask them, you know, I ask him his stories about, you know, how did you get into coaching? What inspired you? Things like that. And you find that you get more information than you ever imagined. So to be honest, it's been a really positive experience so far.
Brilliant. Anybody else? Oh, Kelly Simmons.
Thanks. Your career on and off the pitch is absolutely inspiring. I wanted to talk to you, or ask you a question really about the sort of the transition. So quite a lot of players talk to us about, you know, the difficulty of transitioning from a professional athlete into a different career, and just as we sort of build out the women's professional game strategy, what you think the game can be doing more to support athletes to transition into that second career, really.
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. I think it's about having those continuous conversations. I think going into the clubs and having those sessions with the players, going, you know, what are your interests? There might be within the club itself in terms of marketing or sponsorship, and you have all the resources on your doorstep. So just giving them the opportunity to maybe have, you know, a day where they can experience it, or an hour or two to actually engage in those things, and to partnership with, you know, local universities. I know that was something that Aston Villa was doing when I was there, to allow players to go, okay, maybe you want to transition, you want to start your own startup, you know, business, for example. Well, you know, we know a guy, Gymshark. I'm sure you've heard of the brand. They were like, you know, as players, we can set up those meetings and connect you with other people that can help you discover that pathway and how to get there. But yeah, I just think keep having those conversations, keep allowing the opportunities and maybe the flexibility in the diary at times to just make it happen. Yeah.
So there's been a theme, Anita, hasn't there, about communicating, about talking, about players talking to the clubs, about directors talking to coaches, about men's, women coaches talking to each other. And that way we can all learn about each other's standpoints and trying to help each other and learn from each other.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. You've been amazing, but we knew that. We knew she was going to be, and she was. Anita Asante, thank you so much.